I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, the Executive Director of the Essentia Foundation. His work has been leading the modern renaissance of metaphysical idealism, the notion that reality is essentially mental. He has a Ph.D. in philosophy, another Ph.D. in computer engineering. As a scientist, Bernardo has worked for the European Organization for Nuclear Research at CERN, Phillips Research Labs, and has a 25-year career in high tech, having co-founded the parallel processing company Silicon Hive and having worked as a technology strategist for the geopolitically significant company ASML for 15 years. Bernardo's ideas have been featured in Scientific American, the magazine of the Institute of Art and Ideas, the blog of the American Philosophical Association, Big Think, and numerous academic papers as well. His 11th book, coming in 2024, is Analytic Idealism in a Nutshell, a straightforward summary of the 21st century's only plausible metaphysics. So, Bernardo, welcome. It is a true pleasure and honor to have you with me today, sir.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity.
So today we are discussing your paper, UAPs and non-human intelligence, what is the most reasonable scenario? And in this paper, you've speculated that, quote unquote, if the nuts and bolts UAP phenomena and non-human intelligence behind it are real, they're unlikely to be extraterrestrial. Instead, they may consist of remnants of industrial, technological NHIs evolved on Earth up to 350 million years ago. So let me start out by asking, first, what are the factors that lead you to believe that this is the most reasonable scenario?
Well, one is parsimony. We know that intelligent life can evolve on Earth because it has done so at least once in the form of humans, us. Another one is the pattern of the so-called encounters, or the pattern of observations of these things in our skies, land, and seas, which suggests that they are around all the time. You know, if these were surveys of another planet or another species by extraterrestrial intelligences, they could have done it with far, far fewer visits. Orders of magnitude less. Jacques Vallée, in his early 90s book, which one was it? One of the trilogy, the Alien trilogy of Jacques Vallée from the late 80s and early 90s. In one of those books, he estimates that based on the reports he has, if he would extrapolate that to all times of the day, he estimated that there would have been 3 million landings in a period of only 20 years. That's about 150,000 landings per year, or encounters per year, and that this is not what you would expect if these were extraterrestrials or, you know, interdimensional visitors exploring or surveying another area. This is exactly what you would expect instead if these were just terrestrial things and we just bump into them every now and then as we and they are going about their business. That's what you would expect in that case. And a third factor is they seem to display interest in human activities that could theoretically jeopardize the habitability of the planet. They seem to be exquisitely interested in military activity, nuclear installations. So short of an extraterrestrial with an uncanny sense of altruism, we would have to interpret this as being in their own self-interest. In other words, they let the monkeys run amok so long as the monkeys don't ruin the house, if you know what I mean. But if the monkeys start getting dangerous for the habitability of the planet as a whole, then they would like to know, I suppose. So these are three inconclusive but suggestive reasons why I believe they are from here, not from elsewhere.
Thank you. Thank you. This goes to this idea that this phenomena is so much more complicated than I think that we have realized in the past, right? And this is going to require so much more investigation. So I want to point out that your paper incorporates several hypotheses from other subject matter experts. This did not come out of thin air. You're really building upon ideas that have been out there, and you're synthesizing those into something new and extending that. So Dr. Hal Puthoff has speculated that UAP and NHI originated here in something called the Ultra-Terrestrial Hypothesis. And Dr. Gavin Schmidt, who I've interviewed, has written about ancient lost civilizations in a 2018 paper on the Silurian Hypothesis. We'll come back to that in a moment. And when I say ancient, we are talking really ancient, not thousands of years, but millions of years. So would it be fair to say that your work is kind of an extension of what they're saying, and what you're really trying to do is showcase how that can apply specifically to the UAP phenomena?
You could see it that way. There are a few other hypotheses and observations that went into this, but there is no single element of the paper I wrote that is original. It's basically putting things together in a way that makes sense of the phenomenon at hand, but there isn't drastic originality other than how you bring it all together. I am not an expert in UAPs. I'm not an expert in geology. I'm not an expert in biology, but I can read, and it has been my life now for a while to read and put things together to make sense of certain problems.
Well, and the reason I wanted to point that out was to say, he's not pulling this out of thin air. These are ideas that are out there. And then I think one of the things that you really add to this also is you have this incredible background in computer science, in information technology, and you're able to bring that to bear too. And I think that that is so important, because we are starting to look at the UAP phenomena. And again, as you've suggested, with this idea that these may be machine intelligence, or that may be involved here, right? And so this goes beyond, little gray men flying around in saucers. This is a much larger, more complex phenomena that's going to require understanding. So I want to get into the Silurian hypothesis. This was, again, first proposed by Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank in a 2018 paper in the International Journal of Astrobiology. And the core of the idea is that millions of years of exposure to weather, changing landscapes, changing coastlines, even recycling of the Earth's crust would erase evidence of past civilizations. How plausible is it that a civilization could have existed, and why do you think UAP would survive when everything else has disappeared?
I think it's eminently plausible that there could have been other intelligent species on the planet throughout the 4 billion years in which life has been on this planet. Human beings, as modern humans, have existed anatomically for only 200,000 to 300,000 years, which is less than a blink of an eye ago. And the genus Homo, to which we belong, humans in general, not only modern humans, has existed for less than 3 million years, which is also nothing. Now, there is enough hydrocarbons, oil underground to fuel the early stages of an industrial civilization. That oil has been there since the Carboniferous. That's 350 million years ago. So, and in addition to that, we know that an intelligent industrial technological civilization can be born, evolve through its entire high-tech arch, and then come to an end in a period of only a few thousand years. Our own civilization has existed for 6,000 to 12,000 years, which is nothing. And it can end tomorrow, but because of a number of planetary cataclysms that we have been lucky to avoid so far. For instance, a major cosmic event, not only sunstorms, but supernova explosions that could irradiate the planet, a pandemic, a lot more serious than the one we have just survived, comet or asteroid impact of the kind that destroyed and killed the dinosaurs, climate change or climate collapse, something we are flirting with today. So there's a number of reasons why the civilizational infrastructure of a technological civilization could come to an end and almost exterminate its members. But it's also unlikely that all of them would have been killed in this catastrophe. Even some of the dinosaurs survived and evolved. We call them birds today. That's what the birds are. So if technological evolution has evolved to the point of making the technology small and portable, as our technology is doing now, it is conceivable that the survivors of a planetary cataclysm would have been traumatized about being on the surface of the planet, which is very vulnerable, very open, very vulnerable to all kinds of things, cosmic events, planetary and asteroid impact, weather, climate collapse, and all that stuff. They would have gone underground or under the sea and bring their portable technology with them. Now, what could this technology look like? Well, if you look at where we are as humans today, now we have 3D printing, so we don't need any more large infrastructure to manufacture stuff. We can 3D print them, and we're using a portable 3D print. I do it. We have now technology for very small portable nuclear reactors, not only the ones that go into submarines, which are very small as well, but even smaller and more portable than that, clean burning nuclear reactors that you could bury in a backyard or in a cave. Computers are very small. They used to live inside the whole buildings. Now they live inside our pockets. So you could imagine that the remnants of such a civilization after a planetary cataclysm would have maintained their lives under sheltered conditions based on whatever portable level of technology they managed to develop up to that point. I think this is all plausible.
Yeah. Well, there are so many different possible variations, and I'll get into those in a moment. But because this paper is really speculating on UAP, the origination of them, I want to also point out that you have written several other papers on your website. You have one on the zigzagging Brownian motion of UAP, as well as others on NHI and disclosure. And so I'm going to put links in the show notes to those. I want to recommend that everybody visits those. Can you touch on those briefly, some of the other things that you have just investigated and I guess speculated on?
I mainly speculated on because this is a field where there is so little data to substantiate an argument. You're bound to have to speculate, but educated speculation is better than no speculation and leaving a vacuum for nonsense. The zigzagging motion, this is one of the observables, right? One of the things that characterize UAPs. They seem to move around in a way that doesn't make much logical sense. They don't have a grid search pattern or anything like this. They just have a kind of Brownian motion zigzagging around, which seems to be illogical. So is there a logical account for that? I think there is. Look, if you look at what we are doing ourselves today in the development of our technology, we are trying to integrate brain technology interfaces by inserting those into the brain itself. That's what Neuralink is doing. But even without going that far, there are gaming controllers today that are based on EEG technology, that you wear it in your head and they pick up your brain waves, basically, so you can control what is on the screen just by thinking about it. So if you extrapolate that, you would get to a situation where you don't have pilots sitting in front of a control panel with levers and buttons and keyboards. That's primitive. What you would have is an integration of the pilot's mind with the control mechanisms of the craft, and it wouldn't be a control panel. Another trend, well, let's leave it at this trend for now to keep it short. So if you extrapolate this, you could imagine that the integration between the craft and the pilot is such that even things such as scanning of the environment, like we do with our eyes, would be done by the craft itself, by the technology, because it has augmented sensors and all that. Now, how do we scan the world around us with our eyes? We think naively that our vision is high resolution. We think that our entire visual field is in high resolution. Well, in fact, it's not so. What is actually high resolution is the size of a thumbnail about an arm's length in front of you. In other words, a very tiny area of our visual field is actually high resolution. Everything else is blurred, out of focus, not in high resolution. We think it's all in high resolutions because we unconsciously scan the environment with our eyes by zigzagging our eyes around in order to do a scan. If we would be directly integrated with a craft, we would do the same thing, and the craft would zigzag around as opposed to our eyes zigzagging around. So I think if you want to interpret that kind of seemingly illogical movement in a logical way, you have to think of it as a sort of mind-oriented pattern of scanning of the environment, very akin to how we do it ourselves unconsciously with our eyes.
Well, and again, I think it's so exciting to go through all of these possibilities because this comes out of the idea of different evolutionary pathways, right? And so the behaviors that we would see could easily come from that, different evolution and just different growth in biology. So I wanted to get into some of the other speculative pathways as well. One of those was Dr. Kevin Knuth has performed revised estimates on the Drake equation and analysis of the possible life cycle of interstellar civilizations. And he had speculated that if ET had discovered Earth as opposed to originating here, that may have happened up to 500,000 years ago, potentially much further back. So in his model, he is combining the extraterrestrial hypothesis with Puthoff's ultra-terrestrial hypothesis that you're building off of. And for me, that also raises a larger question. If ET has been here for hundreds of thousands of years, wouldn't that make Earth their home just as much as it makes it ours?
It is plausible that it would, and the hypothesis is not implausible. The reason I didn't and probably won't go there, at least for a while, is that we start adding more entities, more unknowns in our speculation, which we can do, but where do you stop them then? I mean, you can come up with all kinds of scenarios that are all not possible to refute. So I try to stay as grounded as possible. Another thing I did in the paper was to separate the high strangeness from the nuts and bolts phenomenon, because I'm not sure they are one and the same. Now, there are reasons to think they are one and the same, and yet I separated them. Why did I do that? To keep the speculation more grounded, because the less characteristics you try to account for, the less you need to speculate. That's why I separated the two, and I think we should treat the two as two separate phenomena. Even if they have the same agency behind them, we should treat the two separately until we have positive reason to merge them, and then deal with the complication of having to account for internally contradictory features with our hypothesizing. So what you see there is an attempt to remain as grounded as possible, but that doesn't mean that Knuth is wrong, or that the interdimensional hypothesis is wrong, or even that there are really two classes of phenomena instead of one. I don't know any of these. I just try to stay conservative.
Well, I loved the way that you approached high strangeness. So let me get into that, because you went into the consciousness aspect of this, in particular, the multiple reports of strange mental and emotional experiences. That's really the only way that we can describe them, but they are incredibly pervasive. And so, I have done interviews on this topic, many, many interviews for a couple of years now, and that is one of the incredibly consistent themes. Everyone seems to report that, and no one has had a good explanation for it. It's just one of those things that is, I guess. And again, high strangeness is probably the best way to describe that. So you had written that intellectual level communication between more advanced terrestrial NHIs and humans will require direct access to our cognitive processes. They will have to directly modulate our own abstract references and modes and convey their ideas to us by prompting our own minds to articulate those ideas to itself. So I actually, this is in my next question, but I want to try and connect this for the audience to movies like 1977's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where they have to use musical tones to communicate, and 2016's Arrival, that was the one with the giant walking squids, and they have to learn how to communicate using essentially ink symbols, I guess. But the idea is that if these are truly alien entities, wherever they were evolved, they're going to communicate differently, and they're not going to be able to just use English to talk to us, right?
Yeah, we tend to think that we can translate our language into the language of any other species and the other way around. That is probably way too optimistic. We can translate one human language into another human language because all humans involved share the same cognitive system, the same cognitive templates, the same cognitive structures. In other words, they speak alike because they think alike. There are scholars like Noam Chomsky who say that all human languages are physiologically determined. In other words, we speak the languages we do because we are what we are. And he speaks of a universal grammar that provides the basic structure of all human languages. So if you have a shared fundamental cognitive structure, yes, you can translate one language to another, but do we have any reason to believe that an NHI would share our cognitive structure? None whatsoever. We have every reason to think that they would have a very different cognitive structure because they evolved on a separate path. They are a different species, even if terrestrial. So there would be no way to, quote, translate it. You would have to communicate through either more universal means, like music, archetypes, like the symbolic content of the sun. If they are terrestrial, they also evolved under the sun, things like this. But for intellectual level communication, even this kind of communication based on these fundamental archetypes wouldn't go far enough to convey some abstract reasoning, some abstract ideas, like the ideas in our books, in our libraries. To overcome the difference in cognitive structures would require a form of technology that would allow them to gain direct access to our inner cognition. In other words, direct access to our minds. Plant an idea directly and then allow our minds to elaborate on that idea for ourselves based on our cognitive structures, based on our conceptual dictionaries. In other words, we would tell ourselves what it is that they are trying to tell us. What I'm using here is a notion in psychology called metacognition. You can intuitively apprehend a meaning, but before you can act on that comprehension, you have to articulate that meaning to yourself in the form of an inner narrative. In other words, you have to tell yourself what it is that you understood. Otherwise, you don't act on it. You need this metacognitive step. That's a step they cannot take for us, because it depends on our cognitive structure, which is incommensurable with theirs, for all intents and purposes, as far as we know. So we would have to create this narrative ourselves using our own symbols, our own grammar, our own cognitive structures. And they would have to plant the seed of that into our minds if they have the technology to do that. The result of it would be a metaphorical narrative. You would never get a literal narrative. Literal narrative would require a complete aligning of our cognitive systems, which we have no reason to think would be there. So communication, to be understood correctly, would require a degree of subtlety and attention and nuance that most people don't spend the time to try to acquire, I think. They just become discombobulated.
I think that you were touching on something really big. The other aspect of this is if these NHIs are machine-based, right, as you've suggested in your paper, the idea of interfacing directly with our cognitive processing for communication would seem to make more sense than attempting traditional signaling, right? And this also, for me, raises the question of whether NHI are monitoring our electronic communications, as some people have suggested about the Nimitz encounters, or I've wondered if they might be potentially tapped into the internet, right? I mean, again, if these are machine-based entities, it seems like that would be much simpler and in many ways, I guess, more data intensive than trying to communicate with one person at a time. Do you think that that might be going on?
Well, Tim, I didn't mean in the paper to suggest that they are machines.
Okay.
Clearly, I did, but it was unintentional. I am open to the possibility that they are biological but artificial, in the sense that we one day will be able to engineer an organism that is just ideally suited to interface directly with a craft. We will be able to do that because we have CRISPR, genetic editing technology today. We can edit the genes any way we want. The only reason we don't do that is that we don't quite know how the genes work. So we are afraid of screwing up, which we should be. But the technology is there. If it is there here with us, monkeys that have been around for only 200,000-300,000 years, it would be with them as well. They would be able to do that. So I am open to the possibility that the biologicals are gene edited. They are engineered. I'm also open to the possibility that they have some form of machine consciousness, although I don't think it would be the same as ours. It wouldn't be based on silicon and oxides and metals like our computers are, although they could. Either way, I'm not sure that even if their technology is much more advanced than ours, I'm not sure it would be able to easily interface with ours. It could, but I could imagine an arch of technological evolution that, because of its starting point, its early insights, if they were very different from our early insights, that arch of evolution could have taken a completely different path, because technology evolves by building up on what was there before. So if the first step is different, then they will build up on that first step, which is different from ours. So every next step will be different and probably will not converge directly, except on some basics, like the usage of fields. Like we do, we are very proficient at manipulating the electromagnetic field. It stands to reason they would be too, because those fields are universal. They are everywhere. It stands to reason they could manipulate more fields. For instance, if they manipulate the Higgs field as easily as we manipulate the electromagnetic field, they would have total control of inertia, which they seem to have. And we are all discombobulated because we just cannot manipulate the Higgs field. We only discovered the Higgs field for sure in 2012, for God's sake. It's very early. We predicted it in the 1960s, but only discovered it in 2012. I'm privileged to have been part of that. So I don't know. I would be very cautious with speculating that they could have internet access, for instance. I think their cognition stands to be so incommensurable with ours that that's probably not likely. In any case, I wouldn't be worried about that when using the internet.
Yeah, it's just something I wanted to put out there, and it's something I've wondered about and continue to wonder about. Now, so you did touch on the biologics, and I wanted to ask, I had a question about that. In his congressional testimony, David Grush did talk about ET biologics. He was not specific. Popular culture commonly describes a human-like gray body type, and again, in this paper, my takeaway had been that you were referring more to machines, although you've mentioned CRISPR technology and possibly something that goes beyond that as well, right? I mean, maybe when technology reaches a certain point, this idea of biologic versus machine doesn't matter. Maybe that doesn't really apply anymore. It's something new, Dr. Avi Loeb had described AI astronauts or some form of machine-based entity where the craft itself might be the entity. Maybe there's no occupant in it, So there are a lot of different possibilities there. Given the time scales that are involved, again, going back to the Silurian hypothesis, this could be potentially 350 million years. Do you think that something machine-based is more likely, or again, do you think it doesn't really matter based on the level of technology that we're looking at?
I think what is more likely is that they would not be operating according to our categories. Our categories are based on the particular development arch of our culture, our particular cognitive system, and our particular limitations. Many of our categories are artificial. They don't exist out there, they only exist in our minds. They are a reflection of our epistemology, not the ontology of the world, not the world as it is in itself. Let me give you an example. We separate, for very good reasons, by the way, very useful reasons, we separate science from philosophy. And yet both are trying to find out what is real. So why do we separate them? We separate them because of how we cognize the two of them. Philosophy uses different and softer criteria for truth than empirical science. So it's useful for us to separate these two things into categories. But those categories are not out there. Out there, there is just us trying to understand what is real. And that's all there is to it. There is no science in philosophy. Another division in categories that is entirely artificial. We separate what religions refer to from what technology can manipulate. We are very averse, or we don't even think about mixing the subject matter of religion with whatever our technology could manipulate, spiritual technology, if you wish. To the extent that religion is hinting symbolically at something that might be true, and I think it's doing precisely that. It's not literally true, but it is hinting symbolically or metaphorically at something that is. If it is the case that it's referring to something that is true, then it's just an element of reality, and there is no reason to a priori deny that technology wouldn't be able to manipulate that element of reality too, just like it manipulates other elements of reality. So these categories we make, biological and silicon-based stuff, religion and technology, science and philosophy, I think the most likely scenario is that they would not operate according to these categories, because these categories are ours. And therefore, what they do would come across to us as incomprehensible and illogical and even contradictory. I think that's the most likely scenario. Now, regarding artificiality, that we can educate, at least extrapolate. I think just about everything they do have and are would be technologically manipulated. It wouldn't be a throwback to the evolution by natural selection that they underwent. They would have taken, given their age, if it is true, the Silurian Hypothesis and what is on my paper, if it's all true, they would have taken complete control over their own genes. They would have taken complete control, complete from our perspective, not from theirs, complete control over how they manipulate the world, and therefore not to distinguish between an AI and a gene-edited biological. They would not distinguish between their spirituality and their technology. They would hack whatever, quote, spiritual aspect of reality is there with their technology. And none of this would be immediately comprehensible to us. To understand them, we have to take so many steps back from things we take for granted, but which are not part of external reality. They are part of our cognitive categories. We would have to walk back from all that, which is very difficult. We make a lot of unexamined assumptions all the time that we take for granted. We think they are self-evident, and they are not. So to understand them would be an exercise in unlearning, and that's why it's so difficult psychologically for us.
So many big ideas, and that is why it is so wonderful to have you with me today. So I wanted to actually close up by asking about religion. You just touched on that. If NHIs have been here for millennia, could past sightings or encounters have formed the basis for part of the human myth and legend, ancient gods, angels, spirits, and those things that have become part of our storytelling? I mean, humans are natural storytellers, and we explain all sorts of things in the context that other humans understand. Now, a lot of times, those are just natural phenomena, right? I mean, like I'm thinking of like Halloween in the fall seasons, right? It gets darker, the wind starts to blow. People may not have understood why, so they would explain that as spirits, you know. But these entities also, or these encounters, could have formed the basis of something else. Do you think that that may be something as well?
It, it is possible. I would not be able to refute that. In some cases, I think it is even plausible. But that's not only religion, folklore in general. I mean, Jacques Vallée in 1969 with Passport to Magonia already showed that, the fairies, the good people, they share many of the characteristics of the entities that people experience during a so-called alien encounter. So, yeah, it could be the same agency behind the fairies and behind the aliens, and maybe behind the jinn in the Middle East, and the angels and demons in Christianity. It is conceivable. It's not incoherent to think that. That said, I do think that our main religions have a deeper source. I don't think they can be accounted for exclusively in terms of an NHI that we bump against and we are going about when we are going about our business and they are going about their business. There are insights behind the world's key religions in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. There are insights behind all of those religions which Aldous Huxley referred to as the perennial philosophy. Those insights are very deep. They do not entail the existence of jinn or angels and demons and fairies. It's independent of all that. They're much bigger ideas, much more profound ideas about what constitutes the essential fabric of reality and what is the nature of the self with respect to the world. These big ideas, I don't think, come from NHIs. They probably have their own big ideas. They may be even the same ideas, but I don't think the core ideas in the world's religions come from NHIs. I think they are true insights of human intuition. I wouldn't devalue that, no.
Absolutely. Bernardo, let me thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for discussing these ideas. For me, this is so intriguing. I realize it is all speculation and, it's subject to change, right, as we all continue to learn and grow and this story unfolds. But it is wonderful to explore these ideas. And I think that there is so much intellectual value in that as well. So again, let me thank you for joining me. It has been truly a pleasure and an honor to have you with me. Let me close by asking, what do you anticipate seeing in the headlines in the next few months for UAP? And do you have any further papers planned for this topic?
Currently, no. I have lots of other papers that I have to work on other topics. On this topic, I think I went as far as I could given the data that is available, and maybe even further than I rigorously speaking could go. So I already stretched my neck out quite a bit. I will return to this if and when there is more data, which could be very soon. We never know. So for now, no, there is nothing in my drawer waiting for publication on this topic. Although I do have ideas that I haven't talked about because they would be too ungrounded at this stage to talk about. It would be way too speculative. One of them was actually in the first draft of the essay that I published a few days ago on the debrief, but I removed it at the end because I thought, no, this is just too speculative. It's not grounded enough. So let's see what will happen this year. I have no idea. I am told that there is a lot more disclosure coming, either official or leaked, but I don't know myself as a fact what is coming down the pike. I do think we've reached a point now where you cannot put the genie back in the bottle. There will be efforts to do that, so you can expect disinformation. You can expect that there will be some graphical and amazing revelations that will turn out to be disinformation and therefore discourage everybody. Everybody will think, oh, so it was disinformation from the get-go. So let's forget David Grush. Let's forget Commander Fravor. Let's forget everybody else. That's one way to try to put the genie back in the bottle. But with the world of social media, internet, and all that, I don't think you can put that genie back in the bottle. So we'll see. We are up for an amazing ride.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
And thank you for the opportunity and the privilege, Tim. It's been a pleasure.